What if I told you that the reason a huge chunk of the world eats with two simple sticks has everything to do with a super powerful 17th century French cardinal? I know, it sounds absolutely nuts, but just stick with me. We're about to dive into the history of chopsticks, and I promise you are never going to look at your dinner table the same way again.
Okay, so let's set the scene. In one corner, you've got Confucius, the legendary Chinese philosopher, and in the other, Cardinal Richelieu, the famously cunning chief minister of France. We're talking two different continents, thousands of years apart. So what in the world could possibly connect these two guys? Believe it or not, the answer is just weirdly simple. They both couldn't stand the sight of sharp, pointy knives at mealtime. But the reasons they hated them and the solutions they came up with, well, that's what sent Eastern and Western dining down two completely different roads. To really get this, we've got to rewind the clock, way back, because here's the first shocker. Chopsticks weren't even invented for eating. Nope, they had a totally different and way more boring job. So the first chopsticks we know of are from about 3,000 years ago in China. But they were basically just long twigs used to stir giant bubbling pots of stew. That's it. People were still eating with knives in their hands. It took another whole 1,000 years for chopsticks to finally make the jump from the kitchen to the table. 1,000 years. So what on earth changed?
Well, the first big reason was the food itself. I mean, it makes sense, right? You can't really change the tool until you change what the tool is supposed to be used for.
For a long, long time, the main food in northern China was millet, which was basically eaten as a porridge. And yeah, go ahead, try eating porridge with chopsticks. Let me know how that works out for you. But then, as the Han Dynasty grew, they ran into rice, specifically the starchy kind that clumps together in perfect little bites. At the same time, wheat became a big deal up north, which meant noodles and dumplings. All of a sudden, you have all this food that seems practically designed to be picked up by chopsticks. And then you get the final piece of the food puzzle, stir-frying. This new way of cooking meant that everything had to be chopped up into tiny, bite-sized pieces before it ever hit the heat. So, boom, suddenly having a big old knife at the table was completely pointless. The chef already did all the work. But okay, this wasn't just about food trends or convenience. Not even close. This was also about cold, hard economics. You have to remember, during the Han Dynasty, China was home to about a quarter of every single person on the planet. Just let that sink in for a second. That is an unbelievable number of people to feed, and it puts a massive strain on, well, everything.
When you've got that many people, resources like firewood and metal become super scarce and valuable. So you start thinking smart. What's the most efficient way to cook? You cut your food into tiny little pieces. Why? Because small pieces cook way faster, which saves a ton of precious fuel. And what's the perfect, super cheap, easy-to-make tool for picking up all those tiny pieces? Yep, chopsticks. It was just a perfect storm of pure practicality.
So you've got the food and the economics all lined up. You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Nope. There was one final, massive push that cemented the chopsticks' place in history, and it all came from one of the most famous thinkers ever. That thinker was Confucius. And for him, this wasn't about saving fuel. It was about philosophy. He looked at a knife and saw a weapon. He saw a violent tool that reminded people of a butcher shop. And he basically said, a proper, civilized gentleman has no business with something like that at his dinner table. And look, when Confucius says something, people listen. This wasn't just a friendly tip. It became a cornerstone of proper etiquette. As his philosophy spread and shaped the culture, the knife got officially kicked out of the dining room for good. The elegant, peaceful chopstick wasn't just practical anymore. It was now the only civilized option. All right, so that's a pretty airtight case for the chopstick. But I know what you're thinking. What about the French cardinal? Where does he fit in? Well, get ready, because this is where our two stories finally, bizarrely collide. See, just like Confucius, Cardinal Richelieu hated sharp knives at his dinner parties. But his reasons were, let's just say, a little more dramatic. In 17th century Europe, the knife you ate with was essentially a dagger, razor sharp, and Richelieu's guests had two terrible habits. First, they'd get into heated arguments and literally stab each other over dinner. And second, and this might have been even worse for the cardinal, they used those pointy tips to pick their teeth, right at the table. And this is it. This is the moment where everything splits. Both men have the same problem.
In China, the solution was philosophical. Get rid of the violent thing entirely. The knife goes, the chopstick stays. But in France, Richelieu's solution was just brutally direct. He ordered his staff to take all his dinner knives and grind the sharp points down until they were round and blunt. He literally invented the modern table knife just to stop his guests from killing each other and to improve their dental hygiene.
And there you have it, the fundamental reason why a huge part of the world uses chopsticks and the other uses a fork and a blunt knife. It all comes down to two powerful men on opposite sides of the globe who were both just really annoyed by bad table manners. It kind of makes you look at everything differently, doesn't it? What other normal, everyday things are we using that are hiding some completely wild history right there in plain sight?